1 in 5 residential tenants cannot afford to pay their rent due to the financial impact of COVID-19. This is according to a survey conducted by landlord-tenant matching platform Flow. This month, 37% of tenants could afford to pay the full amount, while 22% said they could not pay at all. To tell us more, we're joined by CEO of Flow, Gil Sperling. Good to have you, Gil. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Gil, give us an idea of the scope of your research and how you managed to conduct it.
Yeah, so we're a rental platform. Since we went live early last year, we've grown to over 80,000 tenants. And we felt almost responsible to, as probably the guys who have one of the biggest base of engaging tenants in the country, we felt responsible to try and ask them, how are you as tenants coping during this pandemic? So generally, these are people aged between 21 to 40, really with varying income brackets and the relationship with their landlords. And like you said, the effects of COVID-19 in short are obviously quite striking.
I mean, it must be really difficult at that time, at this particular time. How have tenants, landlords and agents been able to maneuver through the impact of this pandemic overall, as it's really uncharted water for all of these sectors?
Right. So, one of the stats that came through is that there's actually quite a large amount of tenants and landlords who are communicating at this time, which is probably the first step. And of those, about 40% have found a means to settle, either through deferral of the rental payment or reduction or even waiving it completely. So there are very few who are not really budging in terms of landlords, but most are really considerate. And, what the tenant is also learning from the landlord is that the landlord is as hard hit by the pandemic as they are, right? So there's really a lot of reasoning that's happening. And where a landlord can, they do pass down some sort of relief.
So, we look at some landlords, as you say, that they're not moving, they're not budging on their rentals. I mean, you find that some of the let's talk restaurants, hair salons, nail bars, all of these shops and even clothing stores that are open, obviously not a blanket approach because some have been trading from day one of lockdown, and we know that were deemed essential services. So one can imagine that they, would be liable for the entire rent. But some that are making a fraction, if not even 1 cent from their usual turnover, are still being threatened to pay rent. I mean, I don't know how this is even justified if one has to sort of look at it that way.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, people are pulling out legal agreements to try and battle this, and there's case law that's being, raised to try and find the most reasonable way through it. But exactly, I mean, the pandemic has really affected the whole economy. The first stat that we've seen was that 78% of tenants, and these are residential tenants, are somehow financially affected. So that truly is most. And, further to that, your example is in terms of commercial, where some businesses do trade and some just do not. And that tenancy is not being used at all. With residential, we're all being forced to stay at home. And so we are using it, but still, how does one afford it when we all have been so hard hit? And one other very interesting stat that we found was that different landlords are responding differently, and we actually segmented them into the smaller landlords, so the individual, call it mom and pop landlord who own an investment or two as an apartment, and the bigger landlords, the more institutional landlords. And the smaller landlords are a bit more forgiving than the bigger landlords, but the ultimate most important factor to create some sort of reasonable way of getting through this is really up to some level of goodwill and relationship building and communication. It's really just a people thing and understanding where we all sit because we've all been hit by this.
That is so fascinating that you find that the smaller guys are being more lenient than the bigger guys and the so-called bullies in the industry. And I hate to put it that way, but, you find that a lot of these guys are, the big corporates are you paying, whether you like it or not, it's going to happen. We're going to get to a position now where we move to level 3, where a lot more industries are allowed to open. But they're scared to open because they feel that the second they put the key in the door of their shop or business or whatever it may be, they're going to be liable for their full rental. And hence it'll be the decision, well, I can't open. And this is another big problem. Are you finding this? I mean, are you finding that a lot of people are going to say, I'm not opening because I just can't afford to?
Yeah, look, I mean, our focus is mainly on residential tenants where, again, we're kind of stuck in living at our home. But absolutely, we're exposed to a lot of that type of response from the commercial tenancy or the commercial property owners, a lot of those who are our clients. And I think there's some level of negative sentiment, but at the same time, there's a lot of survival mode that businesses are in and that the landlords are in, and that's really where they're jumping in and are taking that leap of faith. And those landlords, and this is across the board of all sectors of both residential and commercial property, those landlords that do have some sort of relationship with their tenant that is more than just a transaction, are the ones that are able to more confidently make the decision that you're saying, you know what, let's take that leap of faith, let's open the door, and we'll work together with our tenant.
So you focus a lot more on residential at this point in time. So the situation for residential, it obviously puts landlords at risk as well. How does it affect them financially, especially if their properties are still bonded with a bank? And now we know that the banks have given holidays, as we know, 3-month holidays under certain circumstances. That 3-month holiday is coming to an end now. What do they do now?
I think that the 3-month holiday has given them some reprieve, and those landlords that we've found in our survey to be more flexible are at least passing down that reprieve that they've had. But, going forward, you're right. The landlord is in a corner as much as the tenant is. They do need to pay their bills. And if the banks and the financial sector decide to become a bit more clinical in their approach, it's going to be problematic, and that's going to be where there's going to be a butterfly effect all the way down the supply chain, down to tenants and down to consumers like you and I. We're, if the beginning of the supply chain, the bank and the banking institutions are not able to continue to be reasonable while the economy recovers, absolutely both landlords and both tenants are going to be in a pretty difficult position.
Finally, repossessions. We know that evictions can't take place during the lockdown, as far as I understand. But repossessions are a real thing and a reality from whether it be, banks or whatever it may be that are in charge of this. And I can imagine that going forward is a major risk and a factor that is going to have to be dealt with. And again, those contracts are going to have to come out and perhaps even be rewritten moving into this new era. I don't know what your view is on this.
Right. Look, on the other hand, the supply and demand of rental property, especially in residential, there was always too much supply in the past couple of years, and I think that's going to increase. So there is going to be stock out there, and there is going to be movement in the market. So what we are seeing is the affordability has come way down. Like we said, 78% of people, they are financially affected by this, which means there's going to be pricing adjustments in the market ultimately. There are definitely steps to get to that point. And there's going to be a lot more stock in the market because the hotel industry is also obviously taking quite a big knock. There are 50,000 Airbnb units out there that are going to flood the market in terms of those landlords that now need to get long-term rentals. So there is going to be stock out there. The pricing is going to adjust, and people are going to move. They're going to move around. I'm not sure it's going to get to a point where there's going to be more homeless people on a massive scale, if I be that extreme. but there certainly is going to be some sort of movement and some sort of movement downwards.
We thank so much for your views and insights into this one. It's a very important issue. Gil Sperling is the CEO of landlord-tenant matching platform Flow, for talking to us about the fact that many tenants are unable to pay rent given finances affected by COVID-19. Remember, Gil, of course, more focusing on residential than the business side of things, but giving us a glimpse into both of them. Thanks again, Gil.